Welcome to the Putback on SNY.TV. I'm Ian Begley, SNY's NBA insider, and we're going to talk all things Knicks and the NBA for the next 20, 30 minutes here. I've got two great guests with me today. Chris Mannix, senior NBA writer, Sports Illustrated, also has a great podcast on boxing on the Volume Sports. And I have the Knicks Walls, Shaun Geddes. So we're going to have a lot of fun here. We're going to start, as always, with the baseline. And the Knicks losing to Atlanta on Tuesday, struggling with their shooting in that game. The guys who they traded for, probably didn't give them enough lift in that game. But the big story is Jalen Brunson, right? Jalen Brunson missed the game with a left knee contusion. And I think the Knicks dodged a bullet here because his fall and everything in the aftermath of it suggested that he had a serious knee injury in that Cleveland game. They avoided that. It's just a contusion, which is a deep bruise, nothing structural at all there for Brunson. So if he's going to be out, he's going to be out days. He's not going to be out weeks. I would think, at the latest early next week. So that was big for the Knicks to dodge that. But Chris, from a national perspective, you look at this Knicks team. Does this stretch where they've been 3-8 with all the injuries, does that change your perspective at all on them and how they looked in January when everybody was healthy?
Not really, because the explanations for the struggles are obvious, right? Anunoby's out, Randle's out, now Jalen Brunson is out. You have to look at this team through the prism of what they are with all those pieces in play. And that is more like the team that we saw in January. And look, I've long been of the opinion that regardless of some of the subtle moves they made, the guys they added from Detroit, the 8th, 9th, 10th men on the team, this team in the postseason is going to go exactly as far as Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle take them. Because I think depth is highly overrated when you get to the playoffs. It's about your stars showing up and being better than the other team stars. So as long as Randle and Brunson are going to be back for the postseason, and it sure sounds like everything is trending in that direction, this team's fortunes will rise and fall on how they perform.
That makes a lot of sense. And you're right about the shrinking rotations. So, don't worry about the 9th, 10th guy. And then comes down to health, too, obviously, for this Knicks team. But, Shaun, injuries aside, what's your biggest concern now during this 3-8 stretch?
I think Chris put it very well. I mean, you know what this team is, like, when they're healthy, and that's what's going to matter. I think my biggest concern really has just been seeing the production of the bench players, and I think it's been great. I think Josh Hart has stepped up a lot. We've seen Deuce McBride step up a lot. I think my biggest concern comes down to Tom Thibodeau, and that's no, knock on Tom Thibodeau. I think he's done a great job. I think the Cleveland win was, a perfect example of what a Tom Thibodeau team does, against all odds, no matter what. We're going to show up, we're going to fight. And so I love that. One of my main questions I had after Alec Burks acquisition was I wanted to be sure that it was still merit-based between Alec Burks and Deuce McBride. I didn't want Deuce to get buried. And now these past couple games without Jalen, Deuce has played 46 and 47 minutes, and Alec Burks has played 11 minutes in both. So clearly that's going to be merit-based, and Deuce earned that spot. I'm happy to see that. I think last night he didn't put Precious Achiuwa back on the floor, and not to say that lost us the game, but I don't think it gave us the best opportunity to win the game. I think Precious was probably our best and most efficient player last night. And so I just need Tom Thibodeau, when it comes down to game time decisions like that, to make decisions to put us in the best position to win. But other than that, we just have to get our guys back.
Yeah. I mean, look, when you coach in New York, you manage in New York, everything you do is going to get scrutinized, win, lose, or draw, and that's the case for Tom Thibodeau. It's just a part of the deal, especially when you're the head coach of a competitive Knicks team. But, Chris, for you, you look at the big picture here. Tom Thibodeau, no extension, and I don't think anything was really on the table before the season. His contract is up after next season. Your thoughts on Thibodeau, the job he's done here, and the idea of him getting another contract or the Knicks moving on to another coach? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think he's done an excellent job. Look, there are very few X's and O's coaches that are better than Tom Thibodeau. And the times that he has had a full, healthy, productive roster, he has, I think, maximized the talent on those teams. Now, the playoffs, I think, will be important for for Tom Thibodeau. They're once again going to be in a position that if they're healthy, they should at the very least win a first round series. And if they're healthy, whether they wind up playing Boston or Milwaukee in the second round, they should be competitive in that series. And if they're not, and they show something that the front office or ownership doesn't like, that could be a warning sign for them. But everything Tom Thibodeau has done this year with that healthy team, I think, has been a positive. It goes back to what we saw in January when they added Anunoby and they made the deals that they made. They took off. And the only reason they've struggled at this point is because they've been battling injuries. And every team that's had the injuries that the Knicks have had would struggle in this way. So I think Tibbs, I wouldn't put him in that coach of the year category, but I think he's been certainly a top 10 coach in the NBA this season.
Yeah, he's dealt with a ton of injuries, obviously. But, Chris, I think you made an important point about the postseason because I think Jim Dolan, Knicks governor, has by and large let Leon Rose and the front office have total autonomy, including on decisions as far as keeping or letting Tom Thibodeau go. I think that was on the table early last year before they made their run when Thibodeau changed his rotation around. But I think postseason, in general, Jim Dolan, his history, he wants to see teams progressing in the right direction. And the Knicks, I think, set a high bar for themselves, making the second round last year, being competitive against Miami. So, Chris, I agree with you in terms of postseason results factoring in here, fairly or not. Tom Thibodeau, I think, has been a very good coach for this team, fantastic coach. I mean, you look at the last 20 years, he's probably been their best. You want to argue Mike Woodson, but it's a short argument. He's right up there. But it's going to be interesting to see these postseason results and how they play into what may or may not happen. And, there's Thibodeau's history, fair or not, with not being on the same page with the front office. From what I've heard, that the Knicks are pleased there to date in terms of Thibodeau, being a partner with this front office. But, Shaun, I need a first name, last name. Who is going to be the Knicks head coach next season?
Tom Thibodeau, for sure. Like Chris said, he's doing a great job, and like me pointing out the thing with Precious, it's not saying that Tom Thibodeau's doing a bit. Like, I think Tom Thibodeau's been excellent. I think that what we've assembled, and I think the reference to January is excellent too, because even the Clippers, when they acquired James Harden, they're playing great basketball now, but they lost like 6 or 7 straight. The Knicks were able to trade a large part of the rotation, incorporate someone else new in, and keep it moving and keep it rolling. That's another thing that a lot of teams are able to do, and that's definitely attributed to coaching. I think he's done a fantastic job. I think he's going to have to do a very good job in the playoffs, especially you get to the playoffs, you run into, against Miami, right? You're going to run into an Eric Spoelstra. And so it's like, I need you to be good, but I need you to be great. And I need you to also get out of your own way. So when I see him do the things like last night where he wasted precious time, I think that we just got to make sure we take care of those things, because that can be something that loses one game in the playoffs. And I just don't want to cause this one game in the playoffs. But ultimately, he's done an excellent job. Not only do I expect him to be here next year, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I agree. But precious minutes, double entendre. Very nice, Shaun. I like it. We're going to go to Jalen Brunson because he'll be day-to-day. He'll be questionable leading up to these next few games. And Tom Thibodeau said last night that his bruise has gotten better over the last few days. He just wasn't where they and he needed to be to play. So, again, just a matter of days there and not weeks. But, Chris, Jalen has a podcast. I think it's called The Roommates Show. It's with Josh Hart. They bring a guest on. And I think he spoke about this on his podcast and another one, maybe with Steven Jackson and Matt Barnes. He was talking about Dallas, the timeline of the decision, Dallas just not coming with a strong offer. He said he was ready to re-sign there, to extend there, to sign another deal. Do you think, it seems like to me there's a world where he's a Maverick right now and the Knicks are still looking for their point guard. How do you assess that situation leading up to him coming to New York?
Yeah, what Jalen said tracks with everything that I had heard about that situation, where he wanted to sign an extension before the season. The Mavericks said, we'll see. He wanted to sign an extension a few weeks into the season. The Mavericks said, we'll see. And then it got to the point where, Jalen, his agents realized that he was outperforming the max contract that Dallas could offer him. And Dallas simply couldn't come back to the table with that very same offer. Look, that's one of the great gaps in recent free agent memory, player contract memory. The opportunity to get an all-star on a contract at 4 years and $55 million. Those don't come along every day. And look, you can say Jalen Brunson might not have been an all-star in Dallas because his numbers would have diminished playing alongside Luka Doncic because Luka just has a high usage rate, but he still would have continued the ascent he was on during that final season in Dallas. And for the Mavericks to have Luka and Jalen under contract and the flexibility with the draft capital they wouldn't have to give up to get Kyrie Irving, the deals they didn't have to make, they would be, I think, in a better position now if they had been able to get Jalen Brunson on that shorter extension.
Yeah, it's just a fascinating what if. And as you mentioned, Brunson doesn't get the opportunity that he has here in New York if he's in Dallas. And obviously the pull to play with Tom Thibodeau, who he's very close with, Leon Rose, Rick Brunson, obviously his dad, and now the Villanova guys. I think it was just a very strong pull initially in that summer to get Brunson here. Knicks obviously made the right move. Let's move on, though, to other injuries because we have OG Anunoby progressed to shooting last week. That's a good sign. Still, I don't think has taken contact. I think Julius Randle is a bit ahead of Anunoby in the rehab process. I think he's looked good. He's done almost everything. And Tom Thibodeau said last night he started to take light contact where it's just, one-on-one and with the pads and the coach kind of banging on him with pads. So the next step is full contact. And I think if, there are no setbacks in these workouts, we're close. And then Julius is close to coming back to the court for the Knicks, which would be big. Mitchell Robinson further away. Obviously, I did see him walk in the building last night. He seems like he's in very good spirits. So that's a good thing for the Knicks and their fans. The thing for me, though, is Isaiah Hartenstein, just quickly. The plan for the Knicks and him is to ramp up between now and the postseason to get to a place where the sore Achilles issue is not lingering at all in whatever he can do in the playoffs. And the plan is to get him to, 30-plus minutes a night. So I'm just tracking that one closely because it's tricky. I want to say quickly on Julius, too, just the idea that he is racing to get back and doing everything he can to get back. He did the same thing last year in the playoffs, and he's doing it again. Obviously going to put a lot on the line if and when he does come back. I think that's commendable. When you look at the rest of the East, though, there's a lot there for the Knicks. It's going to be tough sledding to get through round one and certainly round two. And Chris, you spent a lot of time with the Milwaukee Bucks recently. Piece on Damian Lillard in Sports Illustrated. Go check that out because it was great. What sense did you get when you were talking to Dame? I guess it was a few weeks ago. And how do you analyze what you see from them recently with that context?
Yeah, a growing confidence in Milwaukee is what I sensed when I talked to Damian Lillard and others within the Bucks. The decision to replace Adrian Griffin with Doc Rivers was the right one. They were not performing at the level they believed they were capable of under Adrian Griffin. And even though Doc has spectacularly stuck his foot in his mouth over the last couple of weeks, some of the public statements that he's made, he is still a high-level NBA coach. And what he's done there has not been rocket science. He has simplified the defense where they've gotten back to what made them a top 5 defensive team. Over the last 6 games, they're the number 1 team in the NBA defensively. Offensively, he's seen some of the numbers they were producing with Giannis and Damian Lillard on the pick and roll, and he said, let's just do more of that. And they've been incredibly effective at playing on that level. What I've seen from the Bucks over the last couple of weeks, the sense I get from talking to guys in that locker room is that they believe now and that they are starting to round into the form that we thought they were going to be when they made the Lillard trade and put themselves in the position to be this kind of contender. I think a lot of what they're doing right now is sustainable, and I think they're going to be a very tough out in the playoffs.
Belief is such a strong thing in a locker room, especially when you've been to the top of the mountain like the Bucks have. Shaun, Milwaukee, I would assume they didn't scare you that much maybe 2 months ago, but now where do you think the Knicks match up well with them if they do see Milwaukee in the second round?
I'm definitely, happy for Milwaukee getting it together. I'm not going to lie. From the moment they signed Doc Rivers, I cheered because I just feel like if anybody's going to find a way to screw it up in the playoffs, it's Doc Rivers. So I don't expect him to be able to adjust, like where Tom Thibodeau meets Eric Spoelstra, and I feel like the Miami Heat have the advantage. I feel like we have the advantage on the sideline against Doc Rivers. And so I feel like that plays into it largely. I'm also very confident in us, in terms of they added Patrick Beverley, so now they feel like they have someone who can guard on the perimeter. But I still don't think there's anyone on that roster that can guard Jalen Brunson. It really depends on, and I think we're going to hear a lot of this over the next couple of weeks and into the playoffs. It depends on Julius Randle. It depends on how healthy he is. It depends on where he's at, where his game is at, how his first round series goes, and just how he's able to match up against Giannis. He's done so well in the regular season, and I expect him to be able to show up in the playoffs. And then, of course, they have Brook Lopez to stretch big. We struggle with that often with drop coverage. So how are we on Brook Lopez? How are we on closing out? How are we on being able to help at the basket while also not giving them too many threes? They early in the season, they struggled from three where they were shooting like 36% against everyone else and 55% against us. So how are we able to minimize their threes? But I think that when OG Anunoby is on the floor, he's almost like a shutdown corner in football. Like, I feel like he's able to shut down the entire side of an offense, whether it's on-ball actions, off-ball actions. And so I think he's going to make a big difference as well. And so, honestly, there are not really many teams. Like, even right now, the Celtics are up 4-0 on us, and I hate that. But, like, they have 0 wins against the iteration of this team that I care about. So I think that when we see us at full strength, if we get back fully healthy, I'm not really afraid of anyone.
Now, the Celtics also are right up there, and they will be a tough out for everybody, it seems. Chris, I think I like the idea of a Thibodeau-Rivers coaching match in that second round if you get there. Obviously, those two had great success in Boston winning a title. But when you look at the Celtics team, who you spent a lot of time around over the course of your career, where do you think they are? Are they rowing in the right direction? I mean, they're obliterating, it seems like, everybody. But when you look ahead to the playoffs, how well suited are they to come out of the East?
I mean, they're by far and away the front runner, and that's not a hot take for a team that's 7.5, 7 games up, whatever it is, on the second seed in the Eastern Conference. I thought it was funny that after the Golden State game, Steve Kerr, who is a really bright basketball coach, who has a lot of basketball brain power on his bench, I thought it was funny that Steve effectively said that the best strategy Golden State would come up with to slow Boston was to leave an all-NBA forward who shoots 36.5% career from three wide open from the field. Like, that's how good Boston is, where their worst player in their starting lineup is probably Drew Holiday, who is one of the best defensive players at any position in the entire league. I mean, I talked at the top of this about the unimportance, I guess, of depth. Boston's kind of built for that, right? Like, they've got 6 guys that can beat every 6 guys in the NBA. They're going to be better on paper than every 6-man rotation in the NBA. They might have some trouble with Peyton Pritchard, Sam Hauser, Xavier Tillman, guys like that. But they've got 6 guys that are all-star level talents. And they're great on both ends of the floor. Like the last, going into that, I think with the Cavs game, they were beating teams by an average of like 30 points per game over the last 5-6 games. They're peaking right now as a team. You're not hearing the usual stuff from the past about Joe Mazzulla and some of the gaffes that he's making. Jason Tatum's scoring numbers are down, but that's because he added a 20-point per game guy to the mix in Kristaps Porzingis, and I think he's a better player this year than he was last year. There's just, you put it this way, you've got to really squint hard to find reasons not to believe Boston's going to roll through the Eastern Conference. That's how good they've been all season long.
It's incredibly tough matchup, well put together team. It's going to be a lot of fun to see where things shake out. But Alec Burks, I think for the Knicks, bringing it back to New York, is hasn't shot it well yet, and there's just very legitimate questions about what their Knicks are going to get from him moving forward. Bogdanovic has hit shots, not night in and night out, but he has hit shots. So I think maybe less concern there. But Shaun, you look at Alec Burks, what's not clicking there, and do you believe that he'll get to the level where we saw him a couple of years ago? I think we lost Shaun. So, Chris, I'm going to pivot then. That trade the Knicks made for Bogdanovic and Burks, sending out Quentin Grimes and Evan Fournier and some draft compensation, everybody seemed to love it on paper. How do you assess that now as we're a few weeks removed from the deadline and we've seen these guys a bit?
To me, Ian, it was kind of a nothing burger right? Like, it's not that I don't like the games of Bogdanovic and Burks, and I certainly like the familiarity that Burks has with Tom Thibodeau. And I think Bogdanovic is actually a guy that you can count on for stretches in the postseason. It just goes back to what I was saying earlier, that it just doesn't matter. Like, Bogdanovic and Burks are not going to be difference makers in the playoffs. The difference makers are Brunson and Randle, and to a certain degree, Anunoby, with how he's going to be able to play defensively against the top tier wings the Knicks going to have to get through when they get into the postseason. I mean, look at the last couple of years. I mean, look, we know Julius Randle's postseason struggles have been, they're legendary at this point. He's great in the regular season, and he has been really bad in the playoffs. That needs to change, no question about it. And even Brunson, like, his numbers are really good in the postseason last year, in terms of scoring, but I think his 3-point shot went down, like 8 points from the regular season last year to the playoffs. So he's got to be, both these guys have to be the players that we see during the regular season. If not, it really doesn't matter how many Bogdanovic's you have, how many Burks you have, Hartensteins you have. Like, it all in the playoffs, it all comes down to your star players being better than your opponent's star players. And that's the most important factor to watch for the New York Knicks.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. It's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out, obviously, but we're going to be documenting it every week here on the Putback. You can also catch us in podcast form now. Be sure to check us out wherever you download your podcasts. We are in podcast form every week, in addition to on screen here. And Chris, you look at, the playoffs, and then you look ahead to the offseason. You know this. You know how much results in the playoffs dictate what may or may not happen in the offseason. So we're going to go to a little segment here called Stargazing, because the Knicks have been, linked to different stars. Leon Rose has been brought here, essentially, Jim Dolan said, to get top talent. So the idea that they're going to go after a star is never going to go away until they actually land one. They've been aggressive in the past, Donovan Mitchell and others. But when you look at this postseason, I mean, who are you looking at? Which teams are you looking at where you say, hey, if they struggle, maybe player X is going to be on the move, or, if this team, reaches a certain level, everything's off the board and they'll move forward. I mean, I'm looking particularly at the Clippers and the Paul George situation. How do you see that?
Yeah, Paul George is interesting because I do think Paul George wants to re-sign with the Clippers. I think he's comfortable in that situation. He's comfortable with his role with alongside Kawhi, now opposite James Harden. I think what that's going to come down to are the finances. And my guess with this is that as long as this team doesn't flame out in the first round, Steve Ballmer, the richest owner in the NBA, is not going to blink at paying what needs to be paid for Paul George to come back, if for no other reason than they want to be an elite contender when they go into their new building next year. I mean, that Intuit Dome opens in Inglewood before the start of next season. They want to go in there with a splash. They want to go in there with a championship team. So my gut feeling is that Paul George re-signs, with the Clippers after maybe before. I don't know if time has elapsed at this point, but at the end of the season for sure. As far as Knicks targets, and this is one of my favorite games because it's every offseason. It's like which star is headed to New York, and like Charlie Brown with Lucy, they never wind up kicking the football. But Giannis is the guy you have to keep your eye on the most.
Yeah.
Yes, Giannis signed a long-term contract extension with the Bucks prior to this season, but that contract was more about maximizing his contract value over the lifetime of his NBA career, more than it was a unbridled commitment to Milwaukee. By signing that 3-year deal, he sets himself up for the next deal. So that was purely a financial move for Giannis. If the Bucks wind up a complete failure in the first round, let's say they get beat by Miami in the first round, which is looking like a possible first-round matchup for Milwaukee, then you'll see teams kick the tires on the Bucks and see what their appetite is for bringing Giannis back and see what Giannis's appetite is. I mean, he's been as public as any star player has been lately about needing to win there or finding another place to go and to win. So Giannis, to me, is, if you're a Knicks fan, you're rooting hard for the Bucks to go out in the first round because that at least opens the door for Giannis to be moved in the offseason.
Yeah, that's absolutely a situation that I think the league is looking at. Given what happened last offseason, Giannis even going on the record and putting the heat on Milwaukee to get something done. And then I'm looking too at Minnesota, seeing what happens there. If they have success to a high degree, ownership, I think, has to bring everybody back. But if they struggle and that tax bill just looks bigger and bigger after a first-round exit, I wonder if finances play a role in Minnesota and they look to move off of somebody like Karl-Anthony Towns, who we all know there's dozens of Knicks connections to Towns. Also, Donovan Mitchell, Cleveland, how does that shake out? But Paul George, to me, is interesting because teams with cap space obviously could go after him. And I know that some people with Philadelphia have like the idea of making a hard charge at Paul George. I don't know where they are at the moment with it, but given that, I'd be surprised if Philadelphia wasn't aggressive in trying to pursue George. But I do think at the end of the day, he ends up back with the Clippers for everything that for the reasons Chris stated earlier. And Shaun, we've got you back. And we're going to pivot from Stargazing. We're going to go to the Orlando Magic because that's who the Knicks have on Friday. Obviously, pivotal Eastern Conference matchup. What do you think about not only that Friday night game, which is obviously pivotal, but just in general, how the Knicks have matched up with Orlando this season?
Unfortunately, the Magic have kind of kicked us around this season. I really, really don't want to be swept by them. I think that if we get Jalen back, that we could be in good shape. And if we don't have Jalen, I feel like it'll be a lot like, the last time we played them, we didn't have anybody. I think Jalen missed one of the Magic games already. Julius has missed one. The Magic were the last team we played before we broke the team up and traded RJ and Quick. So it just hasn't been good. They have a lot of length defensively. They're able to be a solid team. They have big wings. And so Paolo gives us issues, especially if we have no OG. So without a fully healthy team, they give us problems. But I think with Jalen Brunson, we can still pull that win out. I feel that way about just about almost every team. But, the way the guys have been playing, everybody's stepping up. We need Dante DiVincenzo, to have it's tough because we've been injured. Dante's kind of only started playing. And then if Dante doesn't shoot necessarily too well, we struggle to create offense elsewhere. So I think that if we're able to create offense, they're a really good defensive team. And, they have their big wings who are going to score. But we're just going to have to fight, honestly. That's really been the whole motto of all these matchups with the depleted roster. Just we have to fight.
Yeah, this team has shown a competitive spirit no matter who's in or out of the lineup. Matt Spenley, very competitive as our lead social person at SNY. We like your competitive streak. You're going to weigh in right now with a fan question. What's going on?
Thanks, Ian. Appreciate you as always. You always know how to introduce me. Want to give Shaun some kudos for a second. Power outage, and yet he was able to rejoin the show. Here he is. So,
wow.
Shaun, welcome back. Kudos to you. We figured it out. All right, question from YouTube, Nelson Bonilla. Any chance Deuce gets consideration for most improved player? Will his limited role early in the year keep him from consideration? So I don't think Deuce will be anywhere near that conversation, given the likes of Tyrese Maxey, who's a heavy favorite, Scotty Barnes, Kobe White's been great for the Bulls. But let's just take a second to talk about Deuce and what he's done. Signed a 3-year, $13 million contract right after. They made that OG Anunoby trade too, and he stepped up big. So, Ian, what we've seen from Deuce, his role, how he's done.
Yeah, I mean, he's been fantastic. I think that Anunoby deal opened up a clear role for him, and he's taken advantage of it. He shot the ball very well. He's brought intensity on the defensive end, as he always does. But he talked, prior to this about he just wanted an opportunity to show what he could do because he had a belief in himself, and his shot's been really good. And he has shown not only the Knicks but the rest of the league that he can contribute regularly in a rotation, can impact winning. And I know one of his trainers, Jawan Staten, has been working with him all along here on every facet of the game, but particularly the shot and coming off the dribble. And I'm sure Jawan's very happy with how Miles has played of late. But you talk about that 3-year deal. It is worth noting, as always, that he is trade eligible starting on June 30th. So that's just a part of the conversation whenever you talk about Miles McBride. Chris Mannix, national writer, votes, I think, on most awards, if not all awards. Where would you put Miles in your Sixth Man of the Year rankings. I don't think he's on your board, but I guess who is on your board?
Yeah, well, the most improved conversation I think is more interesting.
Oh, pardon me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't put him high on the board for the reasons just articulated there, that he wasn't really a factor in the first half of the season. Really started to come on in a much bigger way in this half. I will say what gives him some credibility there, at least on my ballot, is that I steadfastly refuse to vote for guys that were drafted in the lottery, right? Like Scotty Barnes to me is not a candidate for most improved, because you're supposed to improve when you're, the fourth pick in the draft or third pick in the draft. Like I don't know why people vote for guys that are, drafted as elite players. But in my mind, Kobe White is very high on that board. Yes, he was a high draft pick years ago, but he looked nothing like this player last year. And since the Zach LaVine injury, he has really taken off and played a big role with the Bulls. His numbers just spiking across the board. So he'd be pretty high on my ballot. For half season awards, if we're just talking second half, I'd put McBride in that mix. But in terms of total overall seasons, I don't think he's in that top five.
Yeah, it makes sense. If he was in there from game one, it'd probably be a different story. I also think Cam Thomas over in Brooklyn will probably get some consideration there. But that will do it for us this week on the Putback. We want to thank Sports Illustrated NBA senior writer Chris Mannix. Check out his recent story on the Bucks and all his work. He's got a podcast, basketball and boxing, the boxing podcast on the volume. So check that out as well. And we thank you, Shaun Geddes, for your time. Knicks Wall sticking with us through a power outage, which is impressive in its own right. Thank you, sir. We will be back next Wednesday on the Putback. So be sure to check us out then and keep an eye on Honda Sports Night nightly for your Knicks coverage between now and then.